Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents How to Be a Badass Vigilante 3 by Michael Anderle, narrated by Dara Rosenberg. Chapter 1. Kira and Chris stood before the location of their next romantic dinner date, a small convenience store in northern downtown Los Angeles, not far from Little Tokyo. It was closed for business for the evening. "Okay," Kira began. "We've been away for a while, but just try to act natural. If all else fails, focus on the food." Chris gave her hand a squeeze. "Not a problem. Everything will probably be fine, and of course the food is always good, regardless." Since she couldn't think of any objection to that, Kira simply advanced toward the front door and knocked. They were expected, not to mention right on time, so she assumed someone would answer within a minute or so. The door was glass, and thanks to the security lighting, she could clearly see the neat shelves and aisles within. From a hallway behind the cash register counter, a boy of 15 or 16 appeared, noticed them, and ambled over to the door. "Hi, Kira." "Hi, Chris," he said as he let them in. Kira smiled. "Hi, Sam. Thanks for the rescue. Kind of a damp night out here." It was late summer, part of the dry season in Southern California. But there had been a rain squall around dusk, and there was still moisture dripping from trees, street lamps, and roofs. Sam led them into the hallway he had emerged from, which led to the Kim family's semi-hidden living quarters. As they walked, Kira asked, "How have things been with you lately? You meet any new people or do anything interesting?" He came close to missing a step. "I met a couple girls up in Sacramento. They seem nice." Well, Kira thought, that tidbit is encouraging. Sam deserves to make some progress with the ladies by this point. He can get experience talking to them on social media or whatever, even if he doesn't go back up north anytime soon. Sam had had an obvious crush on Kira for quite some time. Now that she and Chris were together, he was smart enough to realize he needed to move on and pursue other girls. Preferably ones closer to his age. Chris quipped, "Many girls seem nice, so be careful until you have a better picture of them. That's cool, though. Too bad they're all the way up there in Sacktown, but hey, things can always change." Kira nudged him. "Seem, eh? What's that supposed to mean?" He replied in a tone of exaggerated innocence while blinking into the distance as though he had no idea what she was insinuating. "Just some generic advice my dad gave me years ago. Women are full of surprises." For a second, she tensed. Her first instinct was to treat it as a coded jab at her. Their relationship had gotten off to a rocky start after all. But no, it wasn't a jab. Chris was sincere and merely joking. He was talking about their relationship, but not with rancor. She relaxed. The hallway behind the register led to a small area with a landing for a staircase, which rose to their living quarters. There was also a door on the first floor beyond the staircase that led to their hidden courtyard and modest outbuilding they used as a dojang and shrine. The three ascended the stairs, and Kira's stomach turned over in expectation as the aromas of Korean cooking wafted toward them. There would undoubtedly be plenty of food. The Kims understood how her appetite worked. Mr. Kim emerged from the kitchen door, and a grin split his aging, kindly face. "Kira, Chris, hello. Dinner will be ready in, He looked over his shoulder and shouted, "How long?" A woman's voice replied, 10 minutes, followed by an addendum or disclaimer in Korean. Looking back at his guests, Mr. Kim said, "You heard her. Come, sit down in the living room and talk." They passed the kitchen door and Kira called, "Hi, Mrs. Kim." She caught a brief glimpse of the woman busying herself at the stove, who turned and raised a hand to her. They would have time to embrace and catch up once the meal was done. Mrs. Kim was not the type to neglect her cooking. They sat down, Kira and Chris on the couch, Mr. Kim and Sam on chairs. "So," the old man began, "what have you two been up to? Staying out of trouble, I hope? There was a lot of news about scary shit happening all over the city and much violence, but it seems to have stopped recently. That, of course, is good." It took Kira a moment to unpack all the implications. The twinkle in Mr. Kim's eye suggested he knew she had been involved in stopping the violence, but the grim twist of his mouth at the same time meant he was worried about her. She and Chris. She noticed that, for perhaps the first time, he was treating the two of them as a unit. "Busy," she told him, "helping friends out when we have to. Also, I can't remember if I mentioned this before, but I'm quitting the Mermaid. I'll be done there in a few more nights. Finally going to put the money my parents were saving for me to good use and start my own business." "Oh?" Mr. Kim replied, raising his eyebrows. "I can tell you one or two things about running a small business. It is not easy, but very gratifying, if you can pull off the miracle of staying solvent past the first year or two." The conversation flowed toward the grocery store's day-to-day operations, as well as the ambitions each of them had for the near future. In the adjacent room, the clanking of dishes and silverware meant dinner was almost ready. Part of Kira wanted to rush in to help Mrs. Kim set the table, but the woman generally preferred to do it herself, thinking of it as part of being a good hostess. Also, Mrs. Kim's movements had been smoother lately and more assured. The cancer treatments must be working. When she looked at the two men again, Chris was saying, "Whatever Kira decides on, we'll figure it out. Maybe I can be her IT guy." Kira noticed something else, too. It had subconsciously registered in her mind at an earlier point, but she had not devoted specific thought to it or been able to clarify to herself exactly what it was, or what it meant. Chris was more comfortable with her. There was a degree of relaxation, of trust and acceptance between them that she had never noticed before, or at least not since she had unveiled the truth of who and what she was to him, and that she had wiped his memory once. That relaxation had begun with the charm, the little medallion she had made for him that protected him from her magic, aside from healing spells and that sort of thing. The major impasse between them had been her power to reconfigure his brain if she felt it was wise or necessary to do so. He, understandably, had been horrified and offended by the idea that his recollections could be erased at any time, calling into question the validity of everything he knew. And so, following Pavla's instructions, she had gifted him the charm. He no longer had to live in fear of what she might do in a moment of pique or concern. She had hobbled and handicapped herself for the sake of earning his trust, not to mention proving her own trust in him in turn. It had worked. It wasn't just the charm she now saw. It had been the space the charm provided for them to learn about each other again, this time with no secrets. Mrs. Kim appeared in the doorway. "Dinner is ready." Kira seized the opportunity to hug the older woman, telling her how much she missed seeing her lately and wishing her well. "Thank you, Kira." Mrs. Kim was smiling as she guided Kira to her seat. "I feel much better." They shuffled in and seated themselves around the table. Heaps and heaps of barbecue, rice, kimchi, and dumplings lay before them, with more waiting on the kitchen counter. Kira waited for her hostess to pour them all tea, then they dug in. Food occupied them too much to talk, at first, beyond brief compliments on the cuisine and polite requests to pass things around the table. It took 4 or 5 minutes for everyone to have ingested enough to slow their pace and begin conversing more. Kira, however, needed a bit more quality time with all the delicious calories and nutrients. Though she was getting better at managing her energy more efficiently, using magic still took a lot out of her, and always would. She needed to recharge. Mr. Kim, reclining in his chair after clearing the first 2/3 of his plate, remarked, "As I said before, the worst of the violence we were hearing about on the news has trailed off this last week. Maybe that new crime boss people were mentioning gave up and went home. Ha! Like I said, starting a business can be rough." Kira swallowed a mouthful of barbecued beef. "We were involved," she admitted. "We tried to be smart about it, and obviously we're still here. But yeah, I couldn't allow that to go on. There was another murder every night." Chris nodded. "I was there too, actually. In the rear guard or whatever you want to call it. But still, it was a hell of a ride, you might say." A shudder went through him, and Kira reached over to squeeze his hand. After he rammed one of the vans full of El Peloquero's men with his jeep, he and Leah had been forced to shoot one of the thugs who had retained consciousness through the crash. Kira empathized. She had taken 4 or 5 people's lives by now, and she had not enjoyed it in the slightest. "Well," Kira said, looking at the Kims, "I'm glad you guys weren't involved in it. I would never ever want any of the trouble I get myself into to work its way back to you." She was dismayed that the conversation had become so serious. Not that she could blame the Kims for being concerned about her or wanting to know what was going on. But it had been nice to talk about casual, pleasant things instead of doom and gloom. Her hope was that her comment would set the discussion back on a lighter track. Almost instantly, she was disappointed. "Kira," Mr. Kim began, his voice lowering in pitch and volume, and his vibe growing ominous. "I must tell you, a woman came to speak to us. The first time, she was in the dark and we could not see her, and she disguised her voice. She warned us to stay away from you, told us to take a vacation. We could not because of Yijin's cancer treatments, but we sent Sam up to Sacramento." Kira went cold inside. She stared straight ahead, not daring to speak until she had heard the whole story. The older man went on. "The second time, though, she came into the store like a normal customer. Slim, brown hair, about 10 years older than you, I think. From somewhere in Europe, to guess from her accent. She said that she was only trying to protect us. And she gave us, all 3, these to hide us from the people she was working for." He reached under the collar of his shirt and produced a small pendant on a black silk cord. Kira at once recognized what it was. A protective charm. A drop of amber lay in the center, surrounded by a disc of silver iron alloy. It was enchanted so the metals would block a wide range of scrying spells or harmful curses, but would still allow healing and supportive magic to be used. It was quite similar, in fact, to the charm Kira had made for Chris, and the one who had taught her how to make it fit the exact description Mr. Kim had given. "Pavla," Kira spat. She could hardly untangle the emotions boiling up in her chest. "She's been in L.A. this whole time. Stephanie saw her briefly when we went to take out El Peluquero. What has she been doing, though? What the hell is her agenda?" Her jaw was clenched. The feelings she had tried to suppress and ignore for weeks were back with a vengeance. Her thoughts became a storm of conflicting urges, incomplete evidence, and bad memories. Or, worse yet, good memories, wounded by the sting of betrayal. Later. There would be time later to deal with her feelings about the situation. For now, she needed actionable information on what had happened and who was behind it. "I am glad," she stated, her tone slow and deliberate as she gritted her teeth, "that Pavla seems to have had your best interests at heart. Or maybe it was just a professional desire to avoid collateral damage. I don't know. I never gotten any closure from her. I still don't understand what happened the last time I saw her. She was my friend. Then she seemed to be my enemy, and now I'm not sure." She took a deep breath as everyone looked at her in concern. When no one else spoke, she went on. "Anyway, did Pavla happen to mention who it was she's working for? That would be useful info. If they are in L.A. and potentially a threat to civilians, I need to know about it." Mr. and Mrs. Kim exchanged glances. Their faces were devoid of any specific emotion, save a vague seriousness. Then Mr. Kim looked directly at Kira. "She works for a group that calls itself the Orthodoxy," he stated. "We have heard of them and have heard that they are operating in our city." Kira blinked. "Yes, I remember now. I forgot Pavla mentioned them. Who the hell are they?" "Not sure." The lines on Mr. Kim's face deepened. "A magic-using group from Europe, I think. I know people who know people. They said that the Orthodoxy has set up shop somewhere in L.A. and is moving to take over all things related to magic in our area, maybe in all of America. They said that these people heard about Motorcycle Man and wanted to see if magic was involved." Kira's head and shoulders slumped. She stared at her mostly empty plate without seeing it. Yes, of course. Her tone was soft. It all made sense at last. Pavla had been an advanced scout, a tracker and a recruiter for the Coven, the opposite of what she had claimed to be. Her reassurances to Kira that she wanted to help witches resist overbearing organizations had been the worst sort of lie, and yet she had seemingly gone against her own orders. She had spared Kira's and Stephanie's lives and helped the Kims. What the hell is the deal with her? Kira's mind demanded an answer. Maybe I'll never know. Things don't always have to make sense. Chris looked like he was about to say something, but Mr. Kim spoke first. We are hidden from them, he reaffirmed, but this may still be a dangerous time. All of us should lie low until we know more. It is not the time to go to war with people like them. The man I spoke to said they have a reputation for being terrifyingly powerful. If they find nothing here that interests them, perhaps they will go home and the danger will pass. Kira suspected Mr. Kim did not believe that. He was just attempting to convince her not to rush off and confront the orthodoxy because he didn't want her to get herself captured or killed. Her hands clenched and unclenched. I won't go after them. Not yet, anyway. There's other things I need to focus on. But my eyes and ears will be open. Let me know if you hear anything more as well, okay? The Kim smiled wanly. Mrs. Kim reached out and laid a hand atop Kira's. Yes, be safe. Do you want more? She gestured at the second half of what she'd made, which was still on the counter. In point of fact, Kira was closer to full than she would have guessed. Maybe a little. And there's always leftovers, right? Azudo stood on the tips of the toes of his left foot. His right foot was held out behind him and his arms were splayed out to either side. He was balanced on top of the wall separating the Lovecraft Estate's flower gardens from its general grounds, and his eyes were closed. A woman's voice complimented him. Very good, Azudo. Next, drain the water and nutrients from the third poinsettia in the second row, but stop short of killing it. Suspend that material in midair, then return it to where it came from to rejuvenate the plant. Oh, and don't fall. Azudo inhaled through his nostrils and bit back a sharp comment. Lorne Jones was a good teacher, better than James Lovecraft, which was why it was a shame that she could only visit sporadically to take charge of his training. Still, the schedule they had set for him was so demanding that even Lorne could do only so much. Every single day, Azudo felt he was being taxed to the limit of his abilities and endurance. More often than not, he felt he was failing. Since Lorne had instructed him to fix a clear picture of the flower garden in his mind before he began, he was able to recall the location of the poinsettia plant without difficulty. And though he was uncomfortable, he had managed to keep his balance so far. If he were to totter off the wall, there would be barely enough time to use another spell to cushion the 10-foot drop to the grass. He might be able to simply roll and hopefully avoid injury. He was in fairly good shape. But at 40 years of age, he could not take for granted that a hard tumble would be nothing to worry about. While concentrating on the plant, his mind briefly drifted to other things. To everything. Why, he wondered, did these people choose to come find me so late in my life? Why could they not have come when I was a boy in Nigeria? Or when I was a younger man after first coming to Europe? This would have been easier, and I could have begun my career with my powers fully developed. It was useless to speculate on what might have been. He focused his mind on the poinsettia and called upon the powers of the universe to take away the sustenance it needed for health. A ball of water and vital nutrients was forming next to it, he knew, while the plant withered toward the threshold of death. Good, said Lorne. Count to 30, then undo what you have done. He did as he was told. Putting everything back into the plant was more difficult since it required him to feel the anatomy of the flowers and stems, perceive its whole operation, and gradually inject the nutritionally rich water back into the places it most belonged with his expanded consciousness. He pictured the plant springing to the full bloom of life again. Lorne said nothing for a moment, then told him, satisfactory, though a bit rough. The poinsettia looks better than it did a moment ago, but you spilled some of it and neglected certain areas, I'm afraid. Nonetheless, the spell was successful, and the plant will recover with a smidgen of extra care over the next day or 3. I will inform the gardener accordingly. Is there anything else you would like to add?
My leg, Azuto stated, is tired.
It was trembling with the effort of supporting himself in such an unnatural position. Lauren sighed. Very well, you may stand normally, but remain on the wall and keep your eyes closed, please. He obeyed, lowering his right leg and then his arms. Briefly, the world swayed around him and he feared he was going to topple off. But he gained control of himself and the vertigo passed. Standing straight atop the wall, he took 2 deep breaths to relax. Lauren had him repeat the spell, this time with the yellow tulips in the northeast corner and without having to balance on one foot. He did better. At the end of the process, the plant looked barely the worse for wear. You may come down, Lauren told him. Azuto opened his eyes and looked down at the prim little woman. Thank you. He cast the charm to slow his fall, then stepped off the edge and floated down to the ground at the speed of a wafting feather. Lauren rubbed her eyes. Despite teaching him part-time, she had other responsibilities when she was away, and she was getting strung out and burnt out, too. Let's break for lunch, shall we?
That is an excellent idea.
Side by side, they walked across the broad lawns, sparing a moment or 2 to take in the beautiful sight of the surrounding forested hills of the upstate New York countryside. Once indoors, they found a pair of James's servants setting out a basic but high-quality luncheon platter, along with coffee and water. Azuto sniffed the sandwich fixings and the coffee, which was made strong and dark.
Ah, very nice. My thanks.
You're welcome, sir. If you need to speak to Mr. Lovecraft, he is in his study and gave you leave to knock if you so choose. The servants excused themselves. Azuto and Lauren sat and ate. Between bites, Azuto asked questions in a breezy, casual tone about the course of his training, what he could expect in the weeks to come, how the Council of Thaumaturgy felt about his progress thus far, and what sorts of opportunities he might have in the organization once he finished his instruction and was inducted as a member. To the best of his ability, he disguised his true intentions under a mantle of innocent curiosity. He did want to know all the things he asked about. More than that, he was hoping she would let slip a scrap or 2 of information regarding the Council's motives for recruiting him. He knew they were not altruistic. Lauren's answers were brief, polite, and conveniently vague for the most part. She did say one thing that interested him. Several of our members, James being perhaps foremost among them, feel that it would be best for our organization to have a new member of your caliber sooner rather than later, given the general state of the world. Which is why, I'm sorry to say, he probably wouldn't relent if you were to ask him for more time to complete the course. Naturally, he pretends it's solely because he wants to keep his word to get you back home to Switzerland as soon as possible, but that's not his only reason.
Ah, said Azuto. I see. He and Mother LeBlanc did seem rather eager to have me on hand as their eyes and ears in Europe. If I may say so, I am well suited to the task, given my contacts in the United Nations and various charities.
Lauren sipped her coffee. Of course. Now, if you don't mind, I would like to spend 15 or 20 minutes reading to unclutter my mind and prepare for our next lesson. Feel free to speak to James if you want. He agreed and left her alone, then strolled to the study door and knocked.
Come in,
said James's voice. Azuto opened the door and stepped in, then closed it behind him and stood about halfway between the threshold and his host's desk. James Lovecraft was an average-sized Anglo-American man who appeared to be in his mid-30s, with short light hair and glasses. He looked thoroughly unassuming and unspectacular, every bit the advertising major he had been during his university studies. One would never guess that he was among the most powerful magicians in the world.
Hello, Azuto, he smiled. How are things going? I know you're tired. We all are, believe it or not. But it's for a good cause. And I wouldn't have put you on the fast-track schedule unless I believed you were up to the task.
The tall Nigerian folded his hands behind his back.
I am managing. But it is difficult to say if I will be able to keep this up for an entire year without a chance to get significant rest. But I have mentioned that before.
James replied in a ragged, breathy voice.
Yes, you have.
He kept glancing at his computer screen, and the red rims around his eyes suggested he was still drinking too much and sleeping too little. As far as Azuto was aware, James had not figured out yet that he had managed to eavesdrop on a recent conversation between James and LeBlanc. Azuto had found a weakness in their magical sound shield and exploited it. Listening to them speak in what they thought was privacy, they had unveiled their true goals. To use him as a virtual military recruit or a spy, to bolster their ranks against what they thought might be a coming time of chaos and strife, which was the direct result of James's decision to release a book to the public entitled How to Be a Badass Witch. In any event, Azuto added, aside from that, I am curious how things are going in Los Angeles. You mentioned that you were concerned about something going on there, and I believe LeBlanc said the two of you were dealing with a problem in that city before you came to Geneva. James flicked his eyes back to his student, and for an instant there was sharpness and suspicion in them. Then he relaxed. Yes, I think I did mention that. A rogue caster we had to shut down, but now there are idiot copycats running around on vigilante crusades. It might even be attracting the attention of other casters from overseas. That is disturbing, Azuto acknowledged. How does it relate to the book? James took off his glasses and rubbed his face. The book was the worst idea I've ever had. Now magic is like an airborne virus spreading across the world. We might have to cut off the powers of a lot more people in the future, or find ways to train the ones who are sensible and seem promising. Ah, Azuto observed with a trace of a sly smile. I am your guinea pig for a new training program. Chuckling, James got up and poured himself a tumbler of whiskey. He did not offer one to the other man, since Azuto had more lessons to come and ought not be impaired for them. In a way, yes, he confessed. We are being forced to confront the fact that our methods are growing antiquated because the world is changing faster than ever before. The Nigerian waited until his host was seated again before he spoke again. Things like this, events of this nature and magnitude, Azuto reflected, have strong ripple effects. I believe the English expression goes, the one about casting a stone into the center of a great lake. Then the waves of the water are felt far out upon the shoreline. James snapped his fingers, ending the gesture by pointing at his student. Yep, that's the one. You even described the metaphor correctly. He downed a gulp of liquor and wiped his mouth. Nodding briefly to acknowledge the other man's praise, Azuto went on. Often there is much power in the world, but it is spread out over space, with many barriers between its sources. But power wishes to exercise itself, to grow greater and feel its own might. And so, it tries to, what is the word? Consolidate. People who have power join with one another because the power of three people working together is greater than the mere sum of three parts. James surmised. You're talking about covens, or academic boards such as our own council, of course. Yes, Azuto felt his energy rise, though there was also an undercurrent of bad memories, recollections similar to things he was seeing now. And he was helpless to stop history from repeating itself. And, he continued, with so many new thaumaturges coming into power and the knowledge of what they are, there will be far more of these consolidations than your one small organization can contain or control. You soon may find yourself opposed by multiple rivals, each of whose numbers is equal to your own, if not greater. In such times, the balance of power can shift dramatically in a matter of weeks or days. James's face was dark, and his voice came out in a low monotone. That thought occurred to me, too, though I didn't want to say it out loud so bluntly. Azuto spread his hands. The tight expression on his face softened. For the most part, I do not blame you. What other choice did you have than to try to spread your knowledge? Your profession was dying out. Taking another sip of his drink, James quipped, Well, thanks. But what if we die too and there's no one to pass on what we've learned to? Then at least you've tried, Azuto declared. So many things in this world, fire back. No, backfire's the word, yes. Yes. Plans with good intentions that cause bad things to emerge later as they float down the stream of life and time. Sometimes we can learn from it. Others we are not so fortunate. But either way, we do our best. Though marginal, It seemed like a portion of James's anxiety and despondency drained away. And
sample complete. Ready to continue?